Walking into your exam and talk about the worst day of your life. I am sure that we've all heard that advice before, but hear me out. Sometimes that advice is not good at all and probably contradicts your evidence, and you can see how that would be a problem, and I'll explain. So stop doing that, okay? There are two parts to every single CNP exam from the veteran's perspective, and that's what we're going to talk about. First and foremost, the absolute most important aspect to your CNP exam is the service connection. And yes, this is absolutely the most important. If you're asked by your examiner, hey veteran, can you tell me about your mental health? Don't start with your symptoms and your worst day of your life. Instead, you need to be speaking through your evidence. So your words are supporting your evidence that you already have. Now, to do this, you have to not only have the evidence, but understand your evidence. And that's both from service and your current evidence. From service is most important. Your current evidence is really going to detail your symptoms. And that's where your worst day comes into play, but not at first. So, hey, veteran, can you tell me about your mental health? You would say, hey, CNP examiner, I sure can. The first time, this is just an example, by the way, the first time I started having these symptoms was back in 2015 while I was on active duty. I did not go see my medical team then because I really didn't understand what was going on. I started to feel really depressed and distant from my family and my children, whatever that looks like from you. And soon after that, we would deploy to country wherever. Once I got back, I then decided to speak to my healthcare team roughly around 2016, 2017-ish timeframe. So then, after you describe your evidence from service, okay, you have to build the service connection. Then you can go into your symptoms. Now, personally, I do not like the describe your worst day mindset. I much prefer the veteran just speak with their healthcare team, whether that is private or through the VA, and simply relay the information to that examiner. There is no gaming the game, okay? There is no, I'm just going to repeat 38 CFR. Doesn't work like that. You have to have evidence supporting your actual claims, okay? It has to be credible and it has to make sense, and the VA is not stupid. So once you start talking about your symptoms, it would look something like this. And again, this is just an example, okay? Well, CNP examiner, after I left the military, I started seeing my healthcare team at the VA or private, and I was put on a treatment plan for depression and anxiety. And I've spoke about feeling distant with my spouse and my children. I've become irritable and easily aggravated, yada, yada, yada. You get the point. And whatever symptoms that you have, that's really where you start discussing your symptoms. Build the service connection, right? The in-service event, build that. Talk about your current diagnosis and your current symptoms, and the CNP examiner will build the Nexus. That's the big three. We have in-service event, the current diagnosis, and the Nexus. All three of those are important. The CNP examiner will build the Nexus, meaning looking at your current diagnosis and connecting it to that in-service event. That is what builds service connection. Now, I have a video that really does discuss what 70% symptoms for mental health could look like, and I will go ahead and link that below in the pinned comment, but you definitely want to check that out. It goes over the 38 CFR criteria for 70% and puts them into everyday words and experiences that most likely we all have had experience at some point. I was actually explaining what 70% looks like last week during a one-on-one, and that veteran started crying about 10 seconds into it, so just be warned, but I'll go ahead and leave that video pinned in the comments too. But the point is that your exam really needs to cover the evidence for service connection. That's most important, okay? Symptoms and all that stuff is number two. Still important, definitely still important, but service connection is most important. You can talk about the worst day of your life all day, every day, and if you don't have the evidence from service, or speak about your evidence other than medical that you don't have from service, I promise you, your claim will be denied because we need the big three. Now, back to talking about your worst day. Here's another argument as to why your worst day really doesn't come into play at all for every single disability. Mental health, you can kind of see how it would come in play, but let's talk about GERD. And we're going to use the new rating criteria for GERD. I'll pull that up, and guess what? I'll go ahead and link that video in the pinned comment as well. But here's the new rating schedule for GERD 7206. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. Okay, so you're over here talking about the worst day of your life. You're talking about your heartburn this, your heartburn that, your chest pain this, your chest pain that. And let's talk about how the VA is actually going to rate GERD. Now, this is effective May 19th. If you're already rated for GERD, don't worry about it, okay, unless you want to increase. But let's look at the symptoms. So we have first esophageal stricture, right, which is it's weird because it's its own rating code, which is just copy pasted this. So you have esophageal stricture causing dysphagia with at least one of these symptoms present. Aspiration, under nutrition, and or substantial weight loss as defined by that, and treatment with other surgical correction of esophageal stricture. Or I'm not even going to try these words, but you get the point, okay? None of this has anything to do with your worst day. Your worst day might cover these symptoms. It might not. But if you have the symptoms for GERD and you're going to a GERD CMP exam, why would you just not understand the symptoms for GERD, according to the VA, and just speak about your symptoms? I'm not a fan of the talk about it's your worst day ever, okay? I'm not a fan of game in the game at all. What I'm a fan of is relaying your medical evidence. Hey, CMP examiner, I already talked about this with my healthcare provider from 6 months ago. Here's my evidence from that VA healthcare provider. I'm sure they're going to have that evidence in their records anyways. And by you speaking about that, it's going to help the CMP examiner out. Hey, CMP examiner, I already have that evidence, and here's the symptoms I discussed with my healthcare team. And they'll say, oh, veteran, that's awesome. Let me go take a look at that, assuming they didn't already, which, to be honest with you, they probably didn't, and I'm just going to be real. So if you have the symptoms for, in this case, GERD, then you would speak about those symptoms for, in this case, GERD, not about your worst day. No one cares about your heartburn is so bad that you can't speak to your wife, all right? Because guess what? Speaking to your wife because your heartburn is so bad ain't got nothing to do with this 80% criteria, or 50, or 30, or 10, or 0, okay? Not even 0. Let's go ahead and look at another one. We'll look at IBS. Just because we have it, we'll go ahead and look at IBS. Now, all I did was word search IBS for anyone who is wondering, but this is how the VA rates IBS. So you're over here talking about how you're going to the restroom all the time and your back hurts and your legs hurt and your bladder hurts and your abdomen hurts. Well, guess what? A part of your worst day of my life symptoms, boom, abdomen pain, you just so happen to hit. But instead of just talking in circles, okay, about your worst day of your life, you can just regurgitate the symptoms for whatever it is you're claiming. In this case, it's IBS. So if you have medical evidence of stool frequency, so how often you're using the restroom, the form of your stools, right, like solid, watery, a mix, really, I'm not a poop expert, but whatever that looks like for you, altered stool passage, straining, and or urgency. So if you're in the car trying to speed home and you're about to poop yourself and you do poop yourself, there you go. There it is. Now, if you pooping yourself is a part of the worst day of your life when it comes to IBS, sure, you would just so happen to hit it, but why change it? Why not just read how the VA rates that condition and then go ahead and speak on that condition? And then there we go. It talks about some more symptoms: 430, 420, and 410. Okay, there's really no reason why you should speak on the worst day of your life when you have the evidence. Just speak to your evidence. The number one advice I could give any veteran is when you submit a claim, submit evidence. Evidence meaning the big 3. And 2, when you go to your exam, you just speak on your evidence. You shouldn't have an original thought. It should just be, hey, I went to medical on this day, around this month, summertime of 2012. That would be enough, okay? Assuming you do have that medical evidence, and that's it. Do not overcomplicate the process.